Hey guys, this is Tech Howdy. I welcome you to another video tutorial where we are building the CMS application using Angular 10 and ASP.NET Core 3. In the last video tutorial, we implemented the country service in our application, which is responsible to get the list of countries from our database. In this video tutorial, we will be working on the profile view. We will be finalizing the profile view. So in the profile view, we are going to require some methods and we would be implementing these methods in the profile.js file that we have created. So let's go and open this profile.js file. This profile.js file will be located inside the root folder where we have created a custom folder for our JavaScript files, and inside the account folder we have the profile.js file. Here in the profile.js file we will require some objects, so let's go ahead and create those objects. So here I have created a country, a variable that will hold the list of countries that we are going to fetch using the API which we are going to create. Then we have a billing address object which has the properties associated with billing address. We have the shipping address properties which has the uh, properties associated with the shipping address, and we have the profile form uh, input elements that we are going to receive values for. So when the form is submitted, we will create a object of typed update profile form, and then we will assign all the values that we receive from the form to these appropriate properties. So these are the four uh, objects that we require to start with. Now we will go ahead and implement the first function, which is responsible to get the application user by their username. So here we'll need two methods. One will be get the user by their username, and then we want to update the user, and we will pass the update details that we need to update in our database. So first we will be working on this method, which is to get the user details by the username. So while this method is called, we need to make sure that we pass the name of the user as the parameter to this method. Now here inside this method we are going to use Ajax so that we can call, or we can make a call to the endpoint of our API. And while this call is made, we don't want the page to reload or refresh, therefore we will use Ajax. And if you need more information on Ajax, I will put a link in the video description where you can read the documentation on it. So let's go ahead and quickly create an Ajax method. So here I have created an Ajax method where this method's HTTP request type will be HTTP GET. The URL endpoint that we want to access will be the API endpoint for getting the user profile, and we will concatenate the username in the route of the URL. The data type would be JSON, and if we receive a success response, we will handle it under the success attribute, and if we receive any error, we will console.log the error. So here we would have to implement the logic on what we want to do when we receive the success response. Basically, when we receive the details of the user, we need to display that details on the form that we have for the user profile. So we need to display these details on the user profile. So if I go to the inspect tab, go to application, go to network, and I try to refresh this now. Here if we click on admin, here you can see in the headers we have made a call to the API version 1 profile controller get user profile and concatenated the username, and in response we have received the JSON response which contains the details of the user who's logged in, and we are then displaying these details on the form that we have created to display the user details. So going back to the method, here let's implement our logic to display the user details. Now this result object contains the user details, so we need to map the details that we have received to the appropriate input elements or to the text fields that we have on the form. So using the jQuery we can target the IDs of the text field or the input value input elements, and then set the values for those field appropriately using the jQuery's methods that's available. So now we also need to make sure that we set the value of the drop downs, and these drop downs, as you know, are created using the chosen library from JavaScript. And if we want to set the values of these drop downs, or want to set any values in this drop down, then we cannot directly set them using the dot value method that's available in jQuery. We need to use the methods from chosen. So basically we will set the value, and then we need to trigger an update on the drop down saying that the value has been updated. So the way we do that using chosen library is, so first we target the uh, ID of the drop down, then we set the value, and the value is received in the result object. Then we trigger a update event on the chosen drop down. So that's all for setting the value for the on the drop down created by the chosen library. Now we would also need to set the value on the calendar, which was created using jQuery UI. So we need to set a value here. We will receive the date of birth of the user. So we need to make sure we set that date of birth in this input value. Since this input value is created by the jQuery DateTime picker, and we would have to set it accordingly. So let's see how we set it on this input element. So here, to set the date or date of birth of the user, first we need to check if the date of birth is null. That's because when the user is registering in our application, or when we are creating the user, the date of birth field is not required for the admin to create the user or to create the admin user. So in an event where it is not required, we can leave that field empty, and therefore when we leave the field empty, the record created in the database will have the value as null because we did not enter any value. Therefore we need to check that if the value is null, then we set a date on the DateTime picker, and if it has a value, then we will set the value that is received from the database, or the value that we have received in this result object for the username. So that's how we will set the value on the DateTime picker. Next thing that we want to also set is the user ID on the form. So we do that over here, and that's how we will set the user ID on the user ID element that we have on the form. Now one more thing I would also like to add here is, in some cases you would want your users to have the uh, do not disclose their gender, so they might not have to specify their gender, so it can be optional on the form. So in an event like this, the field will also have a null value like date of birth. So in an event like that, we will have to handle it or set a default value for that. Here what we can do is we can just create a object like this called as gender, and uh, do a check, a condition. If the value is null, then we will set the field value to be select gender, and if it has a value, then we will use the value that we received. So then we can replace this by the value that we have in this particular variable. So that's basically, if you have this value as not required on your form, then you would need to add this. If you have it as required, then you will obviously have a value always. So now we want to also add the shipping address and billing address, and the shipping address and billing address is on our form, also contains the country and the state drop downs, so we will have to add this as well. So let's go ahead and do that. For the user address and the billing address, when we receive the result object, so if we look at the model for the address, uh, you will notice that the address also has its own properties. So the address model will have the uh, address line 1, address line 2, the state, the postal code, and so on. So we would need to loop on the result dot billing address and result dot shipping address object that we received, and get these properties from that object. So therefore what I would do here is, on the result dot user address, I will run a for each loop, and then I will fetch those properties from the from the user address, and I will place those properties in the appropriate fields. Now here I have not added any country or state, which we will do after we have added the following values on the form. That's because we need to make sure we trigger an update on the form drop down for country, because the country drop down is created using the chosen library. So we need to trigger an update by calling the chosen update event once we set the value. So we will do it outside the for each loop that we just created. So let's add it here. So here, after the for each loop is ended, I'm going to set the values for countries. And while I'm setting the values for the countries, I need to make sure I check that the values for the country is not null or it's not empty. And if it's not null and empty, then only I go ahead and set the values for the appropriate country fields. Now, the next step, after we have added the values for the shipping country and the user's billing country, then we will go ahead and add the remaining values on the form. We need to set them as well. So if we go to the form at the bottom here, we will have the terms and if their email is verified. So in this case, for this user, the email is verified and the phone is verified. Therefore, you will see a check mark here and it's grayed out. The user basically has already accepted and verified the account. So we need to set these values as true if they have already validated the account. So these are checkboxes. So the way we will do it for checkboxes using jQuery. jQuery has a method called as prop, and we can set the value of the checkbox element if the prop is uh, checked. So we can set it like this by calling the prop, and if we want it to be checked if it's true or false. So whatever the value we receive, either true or false, it will assign it to the checkbox that we have over here using the ID of that checkbox element. Finally, what we want to do is we also want to set the image. If the user has an image, we will set the image of that user. And if the user does not have any image, then we will set a default profile image on this particular image preview that we see over here on the form. And we would have to add this default image in on our server on a folder. I will show you how to do that, but for now, let's just add these two lines of code where we are checking if the result.profile pic value is null. Then we will add the default profile pic, or we will use the image source as whatever we have on the result. So now that should be it for the success part of this API response. So if we receive the result, we would have to do the following steps to assign the values to the appropriate uh, elements on the form and display the value to the user. If we have some error while calling the API, we will just console.log it. Uh, if you want to, you can use sweet alert here to display the errors on the pop-up. I'm not going to do that. Or if you want to show it on an alert or use the bootstrap model, you can use that as well. So you can design it accordingly. But for now, I'm just going to log the error on the console and I'm going to debug it if in case there is any error. Or if you don't want to log it, you can just leave it empty. So now the Ajax method is complete. The next thing that we want to add is the update user, because in the same form we also have the option to update the user's details and display the user's detail as well. So when they click save, do any changes and click save, they should be able to submit this form with, and this form should have all the new details that need to be sent back to the server so that the details can be updated. So let's work on the update user method and finish the logic inside this method. So here I have added the logic to update the user's information in the update user method. So to start with, first we have created a form data object, and we have spoken about the form data API in the past video tutorials where we have used it. It's a part of HTML5 form, and you can read the documentation on it on MDN docs and how to use this form data. So if you have any form on your browser or your DOM element, your document on the browser. When you submit the form, the details of that form can be stored in a form data object. Now here, when we update the user, we are going to pass the data as the parameter of this method, and then we will fetch all the data that we have in this data object using a for loop, and we will store that data inside the form data object that we created as a key value pair. Now whenever we are going to create any object and store it inside form data, it needs to be saved as a key value pair. So key is the key that we will use to access that object inside form data. So for example, if I need to get the user's first name from this form data object, so the key would be first name and the value will be whatever value I have over here, which in this case will be tech howdy. So I need to save it as key value pair, so remember that. Now the next thing that I want to do is, after I have created my form data object which contains the information for the user, which includes their details, their profile picture, I need to send it to the server so that the details get updated. But before I send it to the server, I need to make sure that the person who's requesting this change is the uh, owner of that profile, and therefore I'm going to request them to provide their password. So we need to first check if the password is valid, then we update the user profile. Therefore, if we look at the form, when I try to save this form, first thing I need to accept the terms, and then when I save this, I will be asked for my password on the pop-up. So therefore, the sweet alert code that you see here is generating that pop-up, and we are handling the response of that pop-up. When we get the response from the pop-up, we will append that password to the form object that we have already created using the key and value. Next, we will call our API endpoint. This time the HTTP post type method type will be post, because we are going to post some data back to the server. And if you notice, I have added a additional attribute here, which is headers. That's because we need to specify that the request, the accept type of the request is multi-part form data, because we might also be sending some files. So if the user wants to update their profile image, so along with the JSON array which contains the data of the user, we are also going to send some files back in the HTTP response, which will be the user's new profile image. Therefore, you need to specify this encryption type or accept type, multi-part form data. Now, the next step you want to set is the process data and content type to be false. And finally, the success response, we are going to handle it by a pop-up alert. So when we receive the success response, then we can also do a callback method here by calling the then method on the sweet alert pop-up. So we have that option to call the then method. Now what this then method will do basically is, after the pop-up is shown, then this method will execute, so not before showing the pop-up. And when this method is executed, we will get the user's details by their username once again. And the reason to do that is because if I go to the form, I submit my password and I update my profile, then when the form we need to reload the form that's with the new details that we have in our database. So that's why we will go ahead and fetch the new details. And to fetch the new details, we have already created the get user by username method. We're just going to call it and pass the username here as the uh, parameter of the method. For the error handling here, I have added the error handling here. So I'm going to just display the errors on the small pop-up, which is the sweet alert pop-up. And if you wish to, you can copy the same method here in this error as well, but I don't need it here, so I have just done it for the update user method, the error handling. So that is it for these two methods that we need to update the user and to get the user by their username. Okay guys, now we have created these two methods, but that does not mean that we have completed the profile.js file. We would still need to add some other methods and logic. So let me first show you what exactly I mean. So the first thing that we would need to add the additional extension methods would be when I click on the change photo button, you see this file explorer is appearing on my screen, and then I have the options to select the file. Then I select the file, and then when I click on the selected file, you see the preview changes to the file that I have selected. Now this is also done by jQuery. So when I click on this, I need to trigger the event to open the file explorer. So therefore here I will add two methods. First, when the button is clicked, I trigger the click event, and then I change the preview of the file accordingly using this on file changed event. So that's what I'm doing over here, and I'm using the file reader API. This is also part of the HTML5 DOM element or the browser that you have. So like the form data API, we have the file reader API. You can go ahead and read the documentation on MD and docs how to use it. But for this particular form, all you need is these two methods, which will trigger the click event and then replace the preview. Okay, so if we go back and if I try to just refresh this again, I will have the old profile image here because the preview is now disappeared. It's from the memory of the browser. So now the next thing that we would need to add in this is, you see this country object here that I have created. We have not yet made use of it, so let's go ahead and make use of it. So while the form loads, we would need to get the list of countries. So if the user wants to change their country on the form, they should be able to see the list of countries that they can select from. So we're going to fetch that list of countries and store it in that country array that we are going to create. Now we have set it to initially to empty. So now let's fill that array and create a method to get these countries. So here is the method that we will require. I've called this method as get countries. We are doing another Ajax method call here. The type of the method is HTTP get. The endpoint that we are targeting is get countries in the country controller. Now all the endpoints that we have in this particular file, we have not yet implemented it. We are going to implement it soon because we need to implement API versioning before we start creating the API. Yes, I am going to teach you how to version your APIs so it's easy to manage it in your application. Next thing that you see here is the new attribute here, which is the async, which is I want the async attribute to be set to false because I need to wait for this result to complete for the response to come back. So that's why I am saying the set the asynchronous option to false. And then when I receive the result, I'm going to append the values to the chosen dropdown. And to do that, I need to uh, append the values first that I receive, and then I'm going to call the chosen method on the dropdown object. So this is what you would need to do in order to go ahead and get the values. Now here the option values I'm creating using this concatenation options here by running a for each loop using jQuery, and all I'm doing is creating the option value elements and setting the value to those elements. So we have the flag of the country, the name of the country, and ID of the country. So when these values are created, you can see it in the HTML. If I go back here and if I do inspect, you should see these properties here in this. So once we append the option values to chosen, it will convert it to a unordered list like this, and you will see that it is setting the flags using its own attributes here in the options that you see. Okay, so that should be it for this video tutorial where we learned to how to implement the logic to get the data from our endpoints. One more thing you might be noticing that here in the API calls that we are making, we are not setting the CSRF tokens or the XSRF tokens for any cross-site scripting. I don't want to mix that logic over here, so I'm going to create a separate video tutorial for that. For now, we will just try to get the data without any tokens in the request, and I will show you how to add them in the headers of your request in a separate video tutorial, which will also be part of this video tutorial series. So now I don't want to confuse you. For now, just we are going to use the following attributes, and I will show you how to add the other attributes in the upcoming video tutorials. So the next part of this particular video tutorial will be to work on the index view that we created and implement the logic there, because when the uh, form loads for the first time, we need to make sure we get the country values, the name of the countries, so we have it already. So we will do it in the next video tutorial. So if you have any questions so far, use the comment section. I'll be happy to answer it. Please like and subscribe our channel, and also if you need the code, you can find it in the DevOps repo. If you liked our code, if you like our tutorials, if you like what we do, please like and subscribe our channel. We we would need your subscription to keep up this good work. Thank you.